a big step. So hopefully y'all are ready. So let's get started, shall we? I am Lady Rain. This is the Reader's Nook. Yes, that is my intro. I love it. All right, ready? They camped that night about 15 miles west of Sego, and as if to drive home the point of what they had been talking about in the afternoon, there was nothing to eat for the first time since they had left Boulder. Glenn had the last of their instant coffee in a glad bag, and they shared it out of a single mug, passing it from hand to hand. They had come the last 10 miles without seeing a single car. The next morning, the 22nd, they came upon an overturned Ford station wagon with 4 corpses in it, 2 of them little children. There were 2 boxes of animal crackers in the car and a large bag of stale potato chips. The animal crackers were in better shape. They shared them out 5 ways. "Don't wolf 'em, Kojak," Glenn admonished. "Bad dog, where are your manners? And if you have no manners, as I must now conclude, what is your savoir-faire? Where is your savoir-faire?" Kojak thumped his tail and eyed the animal crackers in a way which showed pretty convulsively that he had no more savoir-faire than he did manners. "Then root, hog, or dig," Glenn said, and gave the dog the last of his share, a tiger. Kojak wolfed it down and then went sniffing off. Larry had saved his entire menagerie, about 10 animals, to eat at once. He did so slowly and dreamily. "Did you ever notice," he said, "that animal crackers have a faint lemony undertaste?" "I have. I remember that from being a kid. Never noticed it again until now." Ralph had been tossing his last 2 crackers from hand to hand, and now gobbled one. "Yeah, you're right. They do have a sort of lemon taste to them. You know, I kind of wish old Nicky was here. I wouldn't mind sharing these old animal crackers a little further." Stu nodded. They finished the animal crackers and went on. That afternoon, they found a Great Western Markets delivery truck, apparently bound for Green River, pulled neatly over to the breakdown lane, the driver sitting bolt upright and dead behind the wheel. They lunched on the canned ham from the back, but none of them seemed to want much. Glenn said their stomachs had shrunk. Stu said the ham smelled bad to him, not spoiled, just not rich, too meaty. It kind of turned his stomach. He could only bring himself to eat a single slice. Ralph said he would have just as soon had 2 or 3 more boxes of animal crackers, and they all laughed. Even Kojak ate only a small serving before going off to investigate some scent. They camped east of Green River that night, and there was a dust of snow in the early morning hours. They came to a washout a little past noon on the 23rd. The sky had been overcast all day, and it was cold. Cold enough to snow, Stu thought, and not just flurries either. The 4 of them stood on the edge, Kojak at Glenn's heel, looking down and across. Somewhere north of here, a dam might have given way, or there might have been a succession of hard summer rainstorms. Whatever, there had been a flash flood along the San Rafael, which was only a dry wash in some years. It had swept away a great 30-foot slab of I-70. The gully was about 50 feet deep, the banks crumbly soil and sedimentary rock. At the bottom was a sullen trickle of water. "Holy crow," Ralph said. "Somebody ought to call the Utah State Highway Department about this." Larry pointed. "Look over there," he said. They looked out into the emptiness, which was now beginning to be dotted with stranger, wind-carved pillars and monoliths. About 100 yards down the course of the San Rafael, they saw a tangle of guardrails, cable, and large slabs of asphalt composition paving. One chunk stuck up toward the cloudy, racing sky, like an apocalyptic finger, complete with white broken passing line. Glenn was looking down into the rubble, strewn cut, hands stuffed into his pockets, an absent, dreaming look on his face. In a low voice, Stu said, "Can you make it, Glenn?" "Sure, I think so." "How's that arthritis?" "It's been worse," he cracked a smile. "But in all honesty, it's been better, too." They had no rope with which to anchor each other. Stu went down first, moving carefully. He didn't like the way the ground sometimes shifted under his feet, startling little slides of rocks and dirt. Once he thought his footing was going to go out from under him completely, sending him sliding all the way to the bottom on his can. One groping hand caught a solid rock outcropping, and he hung on for dear life. Finding more solid ground for his feet. Then Kojak was bounding blithely past him, kicking up little puffs of dirt and sending down only small runnels of earth. A moment later, he was standing on the bottom, wagging his tail and barking amiably up at Stu. "Fucking show off, dog," Stu growled, and carefully made his way to the bottom. "I'm coming next," Glenn called. "I heard what you said about my dog. Be careful, Baldy. Be damn careful. It's really loose underfoot." Glenn came down slowly, moving with great deliberation from one hold to the next. Stu tensed every time he saw loose dirt start to slide out from underneath Glenn's battered Georgia giants. His hair blew like fine silver around his ears in the light breeze that had sprung up. It occurred to him that when he first met Glenn, painting a mediocre picture beside the road in New Hampshire, Glenn's hair had still been salt and pepper. Until the moment Glenn finally landed his feet on the level ground of the mud flap at the bottom of the gully, Stu was sure he was going to fall and break himself in two. Stu sighed with relief and clapped him on the shoulder. "No sweat, East Texas," Glenn said, and bent to ruffle Kojak's fur. "Plenty here," Stu told him. Ralph came next, moving carefully from one hold to the next, jumping the last 8 feet or so. "Boy," he said, "that shit's just as loose as a goose. Be funny if we couldn't get up that other bank and had to walk 4 or 5 miles upstream to find shallower bank, wouldn't it?" "Be a lot funnier if another flash flood came along while we were looking," Stu said. Larry came down agilely and joining them less than 3 minutes after they had started down. "Who goes up first?" he asked. "Why don't you, since you're so perky?" Glenn said. "Sure." It took him considerably longer to get up, and twice the treacherous footing ran out beneath him, and he nearly fell. But finally he gained the top and waved down at them. "Who's next?" Ralph said. "Me," Glenn said, and walked across to the other bank. Stu caught his arm. "Listen," he said. "We can walk upstream and find a shallower bank like Ralph said. And lose the rest of the day? When I was a kid, I could have gone up there in 40 seconds and registered a pulse rate under 70 at the top." "You're no kid now, Glenn." "No, but I think there's still some of him left." Before Stu could say more, Glenn had started. He paused to rest about a third the way up and then pressed on. Near the halfway point, he grabbed an outcrop of shale that crumbled away under his hands. Stu was sure he was going to tumble all the way to the bottom, end over arthritic end. "Ah, shit," Ralph breathed. Glenn flailed his arms and somehow kept his balance. He jigged to his right and went up another 20 feet, rested, and then up again. Near the top, a spur of rock that he had been standing on tore loose, and he would have fallen, but Larry was there. He grabbed Glenn's arm and hauled him up. "Nothing to it," Glenn called down. Stu grinned with relief. "How's your pulse rate, Baldy?" "Plus 90, I think," Glenn admitted. Ralph climbed the cut bank like a stolid mountain goat, checking each hold, shifting his hands and feet with great deliberation. When he reached the top, Stu started up. Right up until the moment he fell, Stu was thinking that actually this slope was a little easier than the one they had descended. The holds were better, the gradient a tiny bit shallower, but the surface was a mixture of chalky soil and rock fragments that had been badly loosened by the wet weather. Stu sensed that it wanted to be evil, and he went up carefully. His chest was over the edge when the knob of outcropping his left foot was on suddenly disappeared. He felt himself begin to slide. Larry grabbed for his hand, but this time he missed his grip. Stu grabbed the out-jutting edge of the turnpike, and it came off in his hands. He stared at it stupidly for a moment as the speed of his descent began to increase. He discarded it, feeling instantly like Wile E. Coyote. All I need, he thought, is for someone to go beep, beep before I hit the bottom. His knee struck something, and there was a sudden bolt of pain. He grabbed at the gluey surface of the slope, which was now speeding past him at an alarming rate, and kept coming away with nothing but handfuls of dirt. He slammed into the boulder, sticking out of the rubble like a big, blunt arrowhead, and cartwheeled. The breath slapped from his body. He fell free for about 10 feet and came down on his lower leg at an angle. He heard it snap. The pain was instantaneous and huge. He yelled. He did a backward somersault. He was eating dirt now. Sharp pebbles scrawled bloody scratches across his face and arms. He came down on the hurt leg again and felt it snap somewhere else. This time he didn't yell. This time he screamed. He slid the last 15 feet on his belly, like a kid on a greasy chute. He came to rest with his pants full of mud and his heart beating crazily in his ears. The leg was white fire. His coat and the shirt beneath were both rucked up to his chin. Broken, but how bad? Pretty bad from the way it feels. 2 pieces at least, maybe more. And the knees sprung. Larry was coming down the slope, moving in little jumps that seemed almost a mockery of what had just happened to Stu. Then he was kneeling beside him, asking the question which Stu had already asked himself. How bad, Stu? Stu got up on his elbows and looked at Larry, his face white with shock and streaked brown with dirt. I figure I'll be walking again in about 3 months, he said. He began to feel as if he were going to puke. He looked up at the cloudy sky, balled his fists up, and shook them at it. Ah, shit, he screamed. Ralph and Larry splinted the leg. Glenn had produced a bottle of what he called my arthritis pills and gave Stu one. Stu didn't know what was in the arthritis pills, and Glenn refused to say, but the pain in his leg faded to a faraway drone. He felt very calm, even serene. It occurred to him that they were all living on borrowed time, not because they were on their way to find Flagg necessarily, but because they had survived Captain Trips in the first place. At any rate, he knew he had to be done, and he was going to see that it was done. Oh, he knew what had to be done, and he was going to see that it was done. Larry had just finished speaking. They all looked at him anxiously to see what he would say. What he said was simple enough. No. Stu? Glenn said gently. No, you don't understand. I understand. I'm saying no. No trip back to Green River. No rope. No car. Against the rules of the game. It's no fucking game, Larry cried. You die here. And you're almost surely gonna die over there in Nevada. Now go on and get getting. You've got another 4 hours of daylight. No need to waste it. We're not going to leave you, Larry said. I'm sorry, but you are. I'm telling you to. No, I'm in charge now. Mother said if anything happened to you, and this is what the picture is that they drew for this. Okay? We'll get to the next page. Ah, I forgot. It's on the following because there's nothing on the back. That you were to go on. No, Larry looked around at Glenn and Ralph for support. They looked back at him troubled. Kojak sat nearby, watching all four with his tail curled neatly around his paws. Listen to me, Larry, Stu said. This whole trip is based on the idea that the old lady knew what she was talking about. If you start friggin' around with that, you're putting everything on the line. Yeah, that's right, Ralph said. No, it ain't right, you sod buster, Larry said, furiously mimicking Ralph's flat Oklahoma accent. It wasn't God's will that Stu fell down here. It wasn't even the Dark Man's doing. It was just loose dirt, that's all. Just loose dirt. I'm not leaving you, Stu. I'm done leaving people behind. Yes, we're going to leave him, Glenn said quietly. Larry stared around unbelievingly, as if he had been betrayed. I thought you were his friend. I am. But that doesn't matter. Larry uttered a hysterical laugh and walked a little way down the gully. You're crazy, you know that? No, I'm not. We made an agreement. We stood around Mother Abigail's deathbed and entered into it. It almost certainly meant our deaths, and we knew it. We understood the agreement. Now we're going to live up to it. Well, I want to, for Christ's sake. I mean, it doesn't have to be Green River. We can get a station wagon, put him in the back, and go on. We're supposed to walk, Ralph said. He pointed to Stu. He can't walk. Right? Fine. He's got a broken leg. What do you propose? Shoot him like a horse? Larry, Stu began. Before he could go on, Glenn grabbed Larry's shirt and yanked him toward him. Who are you trying to save? His voice was cold and stern. Stu or yourself? Larry looked at him, mouth working. It's very simple, Glenn said. We can't stay, and he can't go. I refuse to accept that, Larry whispered. His face was dead pale. It's a test, Ralph said suddenly. That's what it is. A sanity test, maybe, Larry said. Vote, Stu said from the ground. I vote you go on. Me too, Ralph said. Stu, I'm sorry, but if God's going to watch out for us, maybe he'll watch out for you too. I won't do it, Larry said. It's not Stu you're thinking of, Glenn said. You're trying to save something in yourself, I think. But this time, it's right to go on, Larry. We have to. Larry rubbed his mouth slowly with the back of his hand. Let's stay here tonight, he said. Let's think this thing out. No, Stu said. Ralph nodded. A look passed between him and Glenn, and then Glenn fished the bottle of arthritis pills out of his pocket and put it in Stu's hand. These have a morphine base, he said. More than 3 or 4 would probably be fatal. His eyes locked with Stu's. Do you understand, East Texas? Yeah, I get you. What are you talking about? Larry cried. Just what the hell are you suggesting? Don't you know? Ralph said, with a sudden utter contempt for what a moment Larry was utter contempt that for a moment Larry was silenced. Then it all rushed before him again with the nightmare speed of strangers' faces as you ride the whip at the carnival. Hills, uppers, downers, cruisers. Rita, turning her over in her sleeping bag and seeing that she was dead and stiff. Green puke coming out of her mouth like a rancid party favor. No! He yelled and tried to snatch the bottle from Stu's hand. Ralph grabbed him by the shoulders. Larry struggled. Let him go, Stu said. I want to talk to him. Ralph still held on, looking at Stu uncertainly. No, go on. Let him go. Ralph let go, but looked ready to spring again. Stu said, Come here, Larry, and hunker down. Larry came over and hunkered by Stu. He looked miserably into Stu's face. It's not right, man. When somebody falls down and breaks his leg, you can't just walk off and let the person die. Don't you know that? Hey, man. He touched Stu's face. Please, think. Stu took Larry's hand and held it. Do you think I'm crazy? No. No, but... And do you think that people who are in their right minds have the right to decide for themselves what they want to do? Oh, man. Larry said and started to cry. Larry, you're not in this. I want you to go on. If you get out of Vegas, come back this way. Maybe God'll send a raven to feed me. You don't know. I'd read once in the funny pages that a man can go 70 days without food if he's got water. It's going to be winter before that here. You'll be dead of exposure in 3 days, even if you don't use the pills. That ain't up to you. You ain't in this part of it. Don't send me away, Stu, said grimly. I'm sending you. This sucks, Larry said, and got to his feet. What's Fran gonna say to us when she finds out we left you for the gophers and the buzzards? She's not gonna say anything if you don't get over there and fix his clock. Neither is Lucy or Dick Ellis or Brad or any of the others. Larry said, okay, we'll go, but tomorrow we'll camp here tonight, and maybe we'll have a dream, something. No dreams, Stu said gently. No signs. It doesn't work like that. You'd stay one night and there'd be nothing. Then you'd want to stay another night and another night. You gotta go right now. Larry walked away from them, head down, and stood with his back turned. All right, he said, and at last in a voice almost too low to hear. We'll do it your way. God help our souls. Ralph came over to Stu and knelt down. Can we get you anything, Stu? Stu smiled. Yeah, everything Gore Vidal ever wrote. Those books about Lincoln and Aaron Burr and those guys. I almost read. I always meant to read the suckers. Now it looks like I got the chance. Ralph grinned crookedly. Sorry, Stu. Looks like I'm tapped. Stu squeezed his arm and Ralph went away. Glenn came over. He had also been crying. And when he sat down by Stu, he started leaking again. Come on, you baby, Stu said. I'll be okay. Larry's right. This is bad. Like something you do to a horse. You know it has to be done. I guess I do, but who really knows? How's that leg? No pain at all right now. Okay, you got the pills. Glenn swiped his arm across his eyes. Goodbye, East Texas. Been pretty goddamn good to know you. Stu turned his head aside. Don't say goodbye, Glenn. Maybe make it so long, it's better luck. You'll probably get halfway up the freaking bank and fall down here, and we'll spend the winter playing cribbage. It's not so long, Glenn said. I feel that, don't you? And because he did, Stu turned his face back to look at Glenn. Yeah, I do, he said, and then smiled a little. But I will fear no evil, right? Right, Glenn said. His voice dropped to a husky whisper. Pull the plug if you have to, Stuart. Don't screw around. No. Goodbye, then. Goodbye, Glenn. The three of them drew together on the west side of the gully, and after a look back over his shoulder, Glenn started to go up. Stu followed his progress up the side with growing alarm. He was moving casually, almost carelessly, hardly even glancing at his footing. The ground crumbled away beneath him once, then twice. Both times he grabbed nonchalantly for a handhold, and both times one just happened to be there. When he reached the top, Stu released his pent-up breath in a long, harsh sigh. My face is so... Let's see if that helps, because I've got this big glare on my face. Hopefully that'll help. Yeah, now you guys can see my face. Stu released his pent-up breath in a long, harsh sigh. Ralph went next, and when he reached the top, Stu called Larry over one last time. He looked up into Larry's face and reflected that in its way it was remarkably like like the late Harold Lauder's, remarkably still, the eyes watchful and a little leery. A face that gave away nothing but what it wanted to give away. You're in charge now, Stu said, and you handle it. I don't know, I'll try. You'll be making the decisions. Will I? Looks like my first one was overruled. Now his eyes did give way to emotion, reproach. Yeah, but that's the only one that will be. Listen, his men are going to grab you. Yeah, I figured they will. They'll either grab us or shoot us from ambush like we were dogs. No, I think they'll grab you and take you to him. It'll happen in the next few days, I think. When you get to Vegas, keep your eyes open. Wait, it'll come. What, Stu? What'll come? I don't know. Whatever we were sent for, be ready. Know it when it comes. We'll be back for you if we can. You know it. Yeah. Okay. Larry went up the bank quickly and joined the other two. They stood and waved down. Stu raised his hand in return. They left, and they never saw Stu Redmond again. Chapter 73. The three of them camped 16 miles west of the place where they had left Stu. They had come to another washout, this one minor. The real reason they had made such poor mileage is because some of the heart seemed to have gone out of them. Okay. It was hard to tell if it was going to come back. Their feet seemed to weigh more. There was little conversation. Not one of them wanted to look into the face of another, for fear of seeing his own guilt mirrored there. They camped at dark and built a scrub fire. There was water, but no food. Glenn tamped the last of his tobacco into his pipe and wondered suddenly if Stu had any cigarettes. The thought spoiled his own taste for tobacco, and he knocked his pipe out on a rock, absently kicking away the last of his Barkham riff. When an owl hooted somewhere out in the darkness, a few moments later, he looked around. "Say, where's Kojak?" he asked. "Now that's kind of funny, ain't it?" Ralph said. "I can't remember seeing him the last couple of hours at all." Glenn got to his feet. "Kojak!" he yelled. "Hey, Kojak! Kojak!" His voice echoed lonesomely away into the wastes. There was no answering bark. He sat down again, overcome with gloom. A soft sighing noise escaped him. Kojak had followed him almost all the way across the continent. Now he was gone. It was like a terrible omen. "You suppose something got him?" Ralph asked softly. Larry said in a quiet, thoughtful voice. "Maybe he stayed with Stu." Glenn looked up, startled. "Maybe," he said, considering it. "Maybe that's what happened." Larry tossed a pebble from one hand to the other, back and forth, back and forth. He said maybe God would send a raven to feed him. I doubt if there's any out here, so maybe he sent a dog instead. The fire made a popping sound, sending a column of sparks up into the darkness to whirl in brief brightness and then to wink out. When Stu saw the dark shape come slinking down the gully toward him, he pulled himself up against the nearby boulder, legs sticking out stiffly in front of him, and found a good-sized stone with one numb hand. He was chilled to the bone. Larry had been right. 2 or 3 days of lying around in these temperatures was going to kill him quite efficiently, except now it looked like whatever this was would get him first. Kojak had remained with him until sunset, and then had left him, scrambling easily out of the gully. Stu had not called him back. The dog would find his way back to Glenn and go on with them. Perhaps he had his own part to play. But now he wished that Kojak had stayed a little longer. The pills were one thing, but he had no wish to be ripped to pieces by one of the dark man's wolves. He gripped a rock harder, and the dark shape paused about 20 yards up the cut. Then it started coming again, a blacker shadow in the night. "Come on, then," Stu said harshly. The black shadow wagged its tail and came. "Kojak?" It was, and there was something in his mouth, something he dropped at Stu's feet. He sat down, tail thumping, waiting to be complimented. "Good dog," Stu said in amazement. "Good dog." Kojak had brought him a rabbit. Stu pulled out his pocket knife, opened it, and disemboweled the rabbit in 3 quick movements. He picked up the steaming guts and tossed them to Kojak. Want these? Kojak did, which I found out. When you got a deer, they leave them in the woods because the animals will eat them. And I never knew that. Stu skinned the rabbit. The thought of eating it raw didn't do much for his stomach. Wood, he said to Kojak without much hope. There were scattered branches and hunks of tree all along the banks of the gully, dropped by the flash flood, but nothing within reach. Kojak wagged his tail, didn't move. Fetch! Fetch! But Kojak was gone. He whirled, streaked to the east side of the gully, and ran back with a large piece of deadwood in his jaws. He dropped it beside Stu and barked. His tail wagged rapidly. Good dog, Stu said again. I'll be a son of a bitch. Fetch, Kojak. Barking with joy, Kojak went again. In 20 minutes, he had brought back enough wood for a large fire. Stu carefully stripped enough splinters to make kindling. He checked the match situation and saw that he had a book and a half. He got the kindling going on the second match and fed the fire carefully. Soon there was a respectable blaze going, and Stu got as close to it as he could, sitting in his sleeping bag. And where the hell did he get a sleeping bag? Kojak lay down on the far side of the fire with his nose on his paws. They must have stopped at a store, like in one of the towns. When the fire had burned down a little, Stu spitted the rabbit and cooked it. The smell was soon strong enough and savory enough to have his stomach grumbling. Kojak came to attention and sat watching the rabbit with close interest. Half for you and half for me, big guy, okay? 15 minutes later, he pulled the rabbit off the fire and managed to rip it in half without... Huh?
It's probably just a cat.
Go find out what it was. Hoping what? Oh, I hope not. Hey, while you're up there, get lady water, okay? My freaking nose itches. I hate allergies.
Okay.
And managed to rip it in half without burning his fingers too badly. The meat was burned in places, half raw in others, but it put the canned ham from great western markets in the shade. And Kojak gulped it down. And as they were finishing, a bone-chilling howl drifted down the wash. Christ, Stu said around a mouthful of rabbit. Kojak was on his feet, hackles up, growling. He advanced stiff-legged around the fire and growled again. Whatever. Hiccups. Ugh, I hate hiccups. Did you finish the Reader's Nook? Oh, I did my intro, yes. The Reader's Nook is what I'm calling this little, I guess we'd call it like a little get-together, a little book club while I read. Yeah. So it's just the Reader's Nook with Lady Rain. Pretty cool, huh? Whatever had howled fell silent. Welcome, everybody. Stu lay down, the hand-sized stone by one hand and his open pocket knife by the other. The stars were cold and high and indifferent. His thoughts turned to Fran, and he turned them away just as quickly. That hurt too much. Full belly or not, I won't sleep, he thought. Not for a long time. But he did sleep, and with the help of one of Glenn's pills. Give me a second, guys. Hello? Oh. Ah. Okay. Hey, what's up? Give me 5. Yeah. Oh, you mean why I called? Give me a second, guys. I'll be right back. Oh, no. I'm reading. I already told them that I'd be taking a break. In the middle real quick. Hey, I had an idea and I'm not sure if it's possible or not, but if I can get Louie to agree and Chris can get Nick to come up with him. Oh, let me go out in the mudroom and see if that helps, okay? Because sometimes the metal in the house affects the bones. Not quite sure. when Chris, yeah, when Chris comes up, I will go ahead and let him know all this and, have him rent a U-Haul and let him know. It's probably the only way we're going to do it. No, it's okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't even gotten over to check the mail, so Chris can have to grab that letter. Yeah, now they have to.
Dino dogs, big dogs, single big dogs.
Did he finally realize what Okay. Well, you have a good day. Try not to think about too much, okay? Yeah. Push everything outside of work and just push it away and concentrate on work. And then when you're out of work, put work aside and concentrate on everything else. Okay? I know. It's not gonna hit you yet. It's gonna take time to hit you. I did find out. Let me mute this real quick. Yeah, but I will talk to you soon. You're welcome. All right. Don't think about it until after work, okay? All right. You have a good day. Love you, sweetie. All right. Bye. Yeah, I was hoping you guys wouldn't hear that, but I had to tell Hazel. I do apologize. My daughter called me, and we are sorting some things out from a sale of her house, and so I really had to take that phone call and try to explain everything because I manage the property, whereas she owns the property, and so I had to deal with that. So I do apologize. So let's get back to this.
What about the store thing?
We are going after I read. Can I finish now? Yes.
How long is this?
I have another little like an hour and a half. Okay.
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 Like how long until you stop
Nick,
reading?
why don't you go upstairs and play on your phone? Okay. I'm not sure. You'll have to ask Dad. All right. So I do apologize, but I am back now. And I see I lost a subscriber, but you know what? That's okay. It happens. But he did sleep, and with the help of one of Glenn's pills. He did sleep with the help. And when the coals of the fire had burned down to embers, Kojak came over and slept next to him, giving Stu his heat. And that was how, on the first night after the party was broken, Stu ate when the others went hungry, and slept easily while their sleep was broken by bad dreams and an uneasy feeling of rapidly approaching doom. On the 24th, Larry Underwood's group of 3 pilgrims made 30 miles and camped northeast of the San Rafael Knob. That night, the temperature slid down to the mid-20s, and they built a large fire and slept close by it. Kojak had not rejoined them. "What do you think Stu's doing tonight?" Ralph asked Larry. "Dying," Larry said shortly, and was sorry when he saw the wince of pain on Ralph's homely, honest face. But he didn't know how to redeem what he had said, and after all, it was almost surely true. He lay down again, feeling strangely certain that it was tomorrow, whatever they were coming to, they were almost there. Bad dreams that night. He was on the tour with a outfit called the Shady Blues Connection, and in the one he remembered most clearly on waking. They were booked into Madison Square Garden, and the place was sold out. They took the stage to tremendous applause. Larry went to adjust his mic, bring it down to proper height, and couldn't budge it. He went to the lead guitar's mic, but that one was frozen too. Bass guitarist, organist, same thing. Booing and rhythmic clapping began to come from the crowd. One by one, the members of the Shady Blues connection slunk off the stage, grinning furtively into high, psychedelic short shirt collars like the ones the Birds used to wear back in '66, when Roger McGuinn was still 8 miles high, or 800. And still Larry wandered from mic to mic, trying to find at least one he could adjust. But they were all at least 9 feet tall and frozen solid. They looked like stainless steel cobras. Someone in the crowd began to yell, "For baby, can you dig your man?" "I don't know that number anymore," he tried to say. "I stopped doing that one when the world ended." They couldn't hear him, and the chant began to rise. Arise. A chant. Starting from the back rows, then sweeping the garden, gaining strength and volume. "Baby, can you dig your man? Baby, can you dig your man? Baby, can you dig your man?" In huge outbursts. He awoke with the chant in his ears. Sweat had popped out over his body. He didn't need Glenn to tell him what kind of dream that had been, or what it meant. The dream where you can't reach the mics, can't adjust them, is a common one for rock musicians, just as common as dreaming that you're on stage and can't remember a single lyric. Larry guessed that all performers had a variation of one of those before a performance. It was an inadequacy dream. It expressed that one simple overriding fear. What if you can't? What if you want to, but you can't? The terror of being unable to make the simple leap of faith, which is the place where any artist, singer, writer, painter, musician begins. Make it nice for the people, Larry. Whose mother was that? His mother's? "You're a taker, Larry." "No, Mom. No, I'm not. I don't do that number anymore. I stopped doing that one when the world ended. Honest." He lay back down and drifted off to sleep again. His last thought was that Stu had been right. The dark man was going to grab them. Tomorrow, he thought. Whatever we're coming to, we're almost there. But they saw no one on the 25th. The three of them walked stolidly along under the bright blue skies, and they saw birds and beasts in plenty, but no people. "It's amazing how rapidly the wildlife is coming back," Glenn said. "I knew it would be a fairly rapid process, and of course the winter is going to prune it back some, but this is so amazing. It's only been about 100 days since the first outbreaks." "Yeah, but there's no dogs or horses," Ralph said. "That just doesn't seem right, you know it. They invented a bug that killed pretty near all the people, but that wasn't enough." I don't know this number. Give me a second. Hello? Yes? All right. I am so sorry, guys. I apologize. If y'all want, I can actually read later, or I can continue reading. My son-in-law came up, and we needed to hash out what's going to happen for getting the house finished. So I do apologize. But yeah, I'm just going to keep reading if that's okay with y'all, if y'all don't mind. I don't like leaving y'all hanging like that. But yeah. Oh, gosh. Gotta give you this. I will do that. All right, we'll see you later. He forgot the mail. It was just Chris. He was dropping off the mail. He forgot to drop off some mail. So, okay. All right. Let me see. We are on the 25th. You ready? But they saw no one on the 25th. The three of them walked stolidly along under the bright blue skies, and they saw birds and beasts in plenty, but no people. It's amazing how... Oh, we already read about the wildlife. They invented a bug that killed pretty near all of the people, but that wasn't enough. It had to take out his two favorite animals, too. It took man and man's best friends. Nick! Come here. And left the cats, Larry said morosely. Kojak brightened. Well, there's Kojak. There was Kojak. Go take them outside, please. That killed the conversation. The Buttes frowned down at them, hiding places for dozens of men with rifles and scopes. Larry's premonition...
I'm going to do that. Don't move!
No, just walk over and open the door. Walk over and open the door. Maybe that would work. Larry's premonition that it was to be today hadn't left him. Each time they topped a rise, he expected to see the road blocked below them, and each time it wasn't. He thought about ambush. They talked about horses, about dogs and buffalo. The buffalo were coming back, Ralph told them. Nick and Tom Collin had seen them. The day was not so far off, in their lifetimes maybe, when the buffalo might darken the plains again. Larry knew it was the truth, but he also knew it was bourgeois. Their lifetimes might amount to no more than another 10 minutes. Excuse me. Oh, I was outside talking. Better than having the dogs bark at my son-in-law. Then it was nearly dark, and time to look for a place to camp. They came to the top of one final rise, and Larry thought, now, they'll be right down there. But there was no one. They camped near a green reflectorized sign that read Las Vegas 260. They had eaten comparatively well that day. Taco chips, soda, 2 Slim Jims that they shared out equally. Good Lord. Tomorrow, Larry thought again, and slept. That night, he dreamed that he and Barry Gregg and Tattered Remnants were playing at Madison Square Garden. Excuse me. My throat is really itchy, and I don't know why. It was their big chance. They were opening for some super group that was named after a city, Boston or maybe Chicago. And all the microphone stands were at least 9 feet tall again, and he began to stumble from one to the other again. Excuse me. As the audience began to clap rhythmically and call for Baby, Can You Dig Your Man again? He looked down in the first row and felt a slapping dash of cold ice water fear. Charles Manson was there. The X on his forehead healed to a white, twisted scar, clapping and chanting. And Richard Speck was there, looking up at Larry with cocky, impudent eyes, an unfiltered cigarette jittering between his lips. They were flanking the dark man. John Wayne Gacy was behind him. Flagg was leading the chant. Tomorrow, Larry thought again, stumbling from one too tall mic to the next under the hot dream lights of Madison Square Garden. I'll see you tomorrow. But it was not the next day or the day after that. On the evening of the 27th, they camped in the town of Fremont Junction, and there was plenty to eat. Do we have tissues down here? We need a tissue. I kept expecting it to be over, Larry told Glenn that evening, and every day that it's not, it gets worse. Glenn nodded. I feel the same way. It would be funny if he was just a mirage, wouldn't it? Nothing but a bad dream in our collective consciousness. Larry looked at him with momentary surprised consideration. Then he shook his head slowly. No, I don't think it's just a dream. Glenn smiled. Nor do I, young man. Nor do I. They made contact the following day. At just past 10 in the morning, they topped a rise, and below them and to the west, 5 miles away, 2 cars were parked nose to nose, blocking the highway. It all looked exactly as Larry had thought it would. Accident? Glenn asked. Ralph was shading his eyes. I don't think so. Not parked that way. His men, Larry said. Yeah, I think so, Ralph agreed. What do we do now, Larry? Larry took his bandana out of his back pocket and wiped his face with it. Today, with summer, either summer had come back or they were starting to feel the southwestern desert. The temperature was in the low 80s. It's a dry heat, he thought calmly. I'm only sweating a little, just a little. He stuffed the bandana back into his pocket. Now that it was actually on, he felt all right. Again, there was that queer feeling that it was a performance, a show to be played. We go down and see if God really is with us. Right, Glenn? You're the boss. They started to walk again. Half an hour brought them close enough to see that the nose-to-nose cars had once belonged to the Utah State Patrol. There were several armed men waiting for them. Are they going to shoot us? Ralph asked conversationally. I don't know, Larry said. Because some of the rifles were wowzers, scope equipped. I can see the sun taking off the lenses. Oh, rifles are wowzers. If they want to knock us down, we'll be in range any time. They kept walking. The men at the roadblock split into 2 groups. About 5 men in front, guns aimed at the party of 3 walking toward them, and there more crouched behind the cars. 3 more crouched behind the cars. 8 of them, Larry? Glenn asked. I make it 8, yeah. How are you doing anyhow? I'm okay, Glenn said. Ralph? Just as long as we know what to do when the time comes, Ralph said. That's all I want. Larry gripped his hand for a moment and squeezed it. Then he took Glenn's and did likewise. They were less than a mile from the cruisers now. They're not going to shoot us outright, Ralph said. They would have done it already. Now they had discerned faces, and Larry searched them curiously. One was heavily bearded, another was young but mostly bald. Must have been a bummer for him to start losing his hair while he was still in school, Larry thought. Another was wearing a bright yellow tank top with a picture of a grinning camel on it, and below the camel, the word Super Hump in scrolled old-fashioned letters. Another of them had the look of an accountant. He was fiddling with a .357 Magnum, and he looked 3 times as nervous as Larry felt. He looked like a man who was going to blow off one of his own feet if he didn't settle down. They don't look no different from our guys, Ralph said. Sure they do, Glenn answered. They're all packing iron. They approached to within 20 feet of the police cars blocking the road. Larry stopped and the others stopped with him. There was a dead moment of silence as Flagg's men and Larry's band of pilgrims looked at each other over. Then Larry Underwood said mildly, How do? The little man, who looked like a CPA, stepped forward. He was still twiddling with the Magnum. Are you Glenn Bateman, Lawson Underwood, Stu Redmond, and Ralph Brentner? Say you, dummy, Ralph said. Can't you count? Someone snickered. The CPA type flushed. Who's missing? Larry said, Stu met with an accident on the way here, and I do believe you're going to have one yourself if you don't stop fooling with that gun. There were more snickers. The CPA managed to tuck the pistol into the waistband of his gray slacks, which made him look more ridiculous than ever. A Walter Mitty outlaw daydream. My name is Paul Burleson, he said, and by virtue of the power vested in me, I arrest you and order you to come with me. In whose name? Glenn said immediately. Burleson looked at him with contempt, but the contempt was mixed with something else. You know who I speak for, then say it. But Burleson was silent. Are you afraid? Glenn asked him. He looked at all 8 of them. Are you so afraid of him you don't dare speak his name? Very well, I'll say it for you. His name is Randall Flagg, also known as the Dark Man, also known as the Tall Man, also known as the Walking Dude. Don't some of you call him that? His voice had climbed to the high, clear octaves of fury. Some of the men looked uneasily at each other, and Burleson fell back a step. Call him Beelzebub, because that's his name too. Call him Nyarlathotep, and Ahaz, and Ashtaroth. Call him Aryala, and Seti, and Anubis. His name is Legion, and he's an apostate of hell, and you men kiss his ass. His voice dropped to a conversational pitch again. He smiled disarmingly. Just thought we ought to have that out front. Grab them, Burleson said. Grab them all, and shoot the first one that moves. For one strange second, no one moved at all, and Larry thought, they're not going to do it. They're as afraid of us as we are of them, more afraid, even though they have guns. He looked at Burleson and said, Who are you kidding, you little scumbucket? We want to go. That's why we came. Then they moved, almost as though it was Larry who had ordered them. He and Ralph were bundled into the back of one cruiser, Glenn in the back of the other. They were behind a steel mesh grill. There were no inside door handles. We're arrested, Larry thought. He found the idea amused him. 4 men smashed into the front seat. The cruiser backed up, turned around, and began to head west. Ralph sighed. Scared? Larry asked him in a low voice. I'll be frigged if I know. It feels so good to be off my dogs, I can't tell. One of the men in front said, The old man with the big mouth. He in charge? No, I am. What's your name? Larry Underwood. This is Ralph Brentner. The other guy is Glenn Bateman. He looked out the back window. The other cruiser was behind him. What happened to the 4th guy? He broke his leg. We had to leave him. Tough go, all right. I'm Barry Dorgan, Vegas Security. Larry felt an absurd response, pleased to meet you, rise to his lips, and had to smile a little. How long a drive is it to Vegas? Well, we can't whistle along too fast because of the stalls in the road. We're clearing them out from the city, but it's slow going. We'll be there in about 5 hours. Isn't that something? Ralph said, shaking his head. We've been on the road 3 weeks, and just 5 hours in a car takes you there. Dorgan squirmed around until he could look at them. I don't understand why you were walking. For that matter, I don't understand why you came at all. You must have known it would end like this. We were sent, Larry said, to kill Flagg, I think. Not much chance of that, buddy. You and your friends are going right into the Las Vegas County Jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. He's got a special interest in you. He knew you were coming. He paused. You just want to hope he makes it quick for you. But I don't think he will. He hasn't been in a very good mood lately. Why not? Larry asked. But Dorgan seemed to feel he had said enough. Too much, maybe. He turned around without answering, and Larry and Ralph watched the desert flow by. In just 3 weeks, speed had become a novelty all over again. It took them 6 hours to reach Vegas. It lay in the middle of the desert like some improbable gem. There was a lot of people in the streets. The workday was over, and they were enjoying the early evening cool on lawns and beaches and at bus stops. Or lawns and benches and at bus stops. And sitting in the doorways of defunct wedding chapels and hawk shops. They rubber-necked the Utah SP cars as they went by, and then went back to whatever they had been talking about. Larry was looking around thoughtfully. The electricity was on, the streets were cleared, the rubble of looting was gone. Glenn was right, he said. He got the trains running on time. But still I wonder if this is any way to run a railroad. Your people all look like they've got the nervous complaint, Dorgan. Dorgan didn't reply. They arrived at the county jail and drove around to the rear. The 2 police cars parked in a cement courtyard. When Larry got out, wincing at the stiffness that had settled in his muscles, he saw that Dorgan had 2 sets of cuffs. Hey, come on, he said. Really? Sorry, his orders. Ralph said, I ain't never been handcuffed in my life. I was picked up and throwed in the drunk tank a couple of times before I was married, but never was I cuffed. Larry was speaking slowly, his Oklahoma accent becoming more pronounced, and Larry realized he was totally furious. I have my orders, Dorgan said. Don't make it any tougher than it has to be. Your orders, Ralph said. I know who gives your orders. He murdered my friend Nick. What are you doing hooked up with that hellhound? You seem like a nice enough fella when you're by yourself. He was looking at Dorgan with such an expression of angry interrogation that Dorgan shook his head and looked away. This is my job, he said, and I do it. End of story. Put your wrists out, or I'll have somebody do it for you. Larry put his hands out, and Dorgan cuffed him. What are you? Larry asked curiously. What were you? Before. Santa Monica Police, Detective Second. And you're with him. Forgive me for saying so, but it's really sort of funny. Glenn Bateman was pushed over to join them. What are you shoving him around for? Dorgan asked angrily. If you had to listen to 6 hours of this guy's bullshit, you'd do some pushing too, one of the men said. I don't care how much bullshit you had to listen to. Keep your hands to yourself, Dorgan looked at Larry. Why is it funny that I should be with him? I was a cop for 10 years before Captain Trips. I saw what happens when guys like you are in charge, you see. Young man, Glenn said mildly, your experiences with a few battered babies and drug abusers does not justify your embrace of a monster. Get them out of here, Dorgan said evenly. Separate cells, separate wings. I don't think you'll be able to live with your choice, young man, Glenn said. There doesn't seem to be quite enough Nazi in you. This time, Dorgan pushed Glenn himself. Larry was separated from the other 2 and taken down an empty corridor, graced with signs reading, no spitting, this way to showers and to lousing, and one that read, you are not a guest. I wouldn't mind a shower, he said. Maybe, Dorgan said. We'll see. See what? How cooperative you can be. Dorgan opened a cell at the end of the corridor and ushered Larry in. How about the bracelets, Larry said, holding them out. Sure. Dorgan unlocked them and took them off. Better? Much. Still want that shower? I sure do. More than that, Larry didn't want to be left alone, listening to the echoey sound of footfalls going away. If he was left alone, the fear would start to come back. Dorgan produced a small notebook. How many are you? In the zone. 6,000, Larry said. We all play bingo every Thursday night, and the prize is a coverall game. In a coverall game is a 20-pound turkey. Do you want that shower or not? I want it. But he no longer thought he was going to get it. How many of you over there? 25,000 and 4,000 are under 12 and get in free at the drive-in. Economically speaking, it's a bummer. Dorgan snapped his notebook shut and looked at him. I can't, man, Larry said. Put yourself in my place. Dorgan shook his head. I can't do that because I'm not nuts. Why are you guys here? What good do you think it's going to do to you? He's going to kill you dead as dog shit tomorrow or the next day. And if he wants you to talk, you will. If he wants you to tap dance and jerk off at the same time, you'll do that too. You must be crazy. We were told to come by the old woman, Mother Abigail. Probably you dreamed about her. Dorgan shook his head, but suddenly his eyes wouldn't meet Larry's. I don't know what you're talking about. Then let's leave it at that. Sure you don't want to talk to me? Get that shower? Larry laughed. I don't work that cheap. Send your own spy over to the other side. If you can find one that doesn't look like a weasel, the second Mother Abigail's name gets mentioned. that is. Any way you want it, Dorgan said. He walked back down the hallway under the mesh enclosed lights. At the far end, he stepped past a steel-barred gate that rolled shut behind him with a hollow crash. Larry looked around. Like Ralph, he had been in jail on a couple of occasions. Public intoxication once, possession of an ounce of marijuana on another, blaming youth. It's not the Ritz, he muttered. The mattress on the bunk looked decidedly moldy, and he wondered a little morbidly if someone had died on it back in June or early July. The toilet worked, but filled with rusty water. Hi, the first time he flushed it.
I just save it. It's a...
Oh no, we are not spending $99 on a game. Nope, delete it.
How?
It says you have to spend $99 to save $20.
But I...
Just don't save it. I'm not spending $99
No, I
on
just
a
save
game.
it right now.
Okay, but you're not buying a $99 game. I'm sorry. Not for an app.
What about a $19.99?
You just spent $20 on your games today.
Oh.
And I'm not spending $99 on an app. Something that you can delete from your phone and have to buy all over again. No, absolutely not. Ooh, women have a bucket. Men have a... What rhymes?
How am I supposed to delete the offer?
Bucket. I don't know. Just X out of it.
Because I just save it, but...
I don't know. We're not spending $99 on a game. No. Ask your dad. He'll say the same thing. Let's see. Bucket. Suck it. Bucket. Tuck it. Huck it. Guck it. Muck it. Nuck it. Luck it. Cuck it. Yuck it. Zuck it. Wuck it. Ruck it. Duck it. I rhymed a lot. I rhymed a lot. I just had to answer the dude even though he's not still here. All right. Hi, sweetheart. Okay. Let's see. The toilet worked, but filled with rusty water the first time he flushed it, a reliable sign that it hadn't been used for a long time. Someone had left a paperback Western. Larry picked it up and then put it down again. He sat on the bunk and listened to the silence. He had always hated to be alone, but in a way he always had been, until he arrived in the free zone. And now it wasn't so bad as he had been afraid it would be. It wasn't, so bad as he thought it would be. Bad enough, but he could cope. He's going to kill you dead as dog shit tomorrow or the next day. Except Larry didn't believe it. It just wasn't going to happen that way. I will fear no evil, he said into the dead silence of the cell block wing, and he liked the way it sounded. He said it again. He lay down, and the thought occurred that he had finally made it most of the way back to the West Coast. But the trip had been longer and stranger than anyone ever could have imagined, and the trip wasn't quite over yet. I will fear no evil, he said again. He fell asleep, his face calm, and he slept a dreamless peace. At 10 o'clock the next day, 24 hours after they had first seen the roadblock in the distance, Randall Flagg and Lloyd Henrid came to see Glenn Bateman. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor of his cell. He had found a piece of charcoal under his bunk and had just finished writing his legend on the wall amid the intaglio of male and female genitals, names, phone numbers, and obscene little poems. I am not the potter, nor the potter's wheel, but the potter's clay. It is not the value of the shape attained as dependent upon the intrinsic worth of the clay as upon the wheel and the master's skill. Glenn was admiring his proverb. Or was it an aphorism? When the temperature in the deserted cell block suddenly seemed to drop 10 degrees, the door at the end of the corridor rumbled open. The saliva in Glenn's mouth was suddenly all gone, and the charcoal snapped between his fingers. Boot heels clocked up the hallway toward him. Other footfalls, smaller and insignificant, pattered along in counterpoint, trying to keep up. Why, it's him. I'm going to see his face. Suddenly, his arthritis was worse, terrible, in fact. It seemed that his bones had suddenly been hollowed out and filled with ground glass. And still, he turned with an interested, expectant smile on his face as the boot heel stopped in front of his cell. Well, there you are, Glenn said. And you're not half the boogeyman we thought you must be. Standing on the other side of the bars were two men. Flagg was on Glenn's right. He was wearing a blue jeans and a white silk shirt that gleamed mellowly in the dim lights. He was grinning in at Glenn. Behind him was a shorter man who was not smiling at all. He had an undershot chin and eyes that seemed too big for his face. His complexion was one that the desert climate was never going to be kind to. He had burned, peeled, and burned again. Around his neck, he wore a black stone flawed with red. It was a greasy, resinous look. I'd like you to meet my associate, Flagg said with a giggle. Lloyd Henrid. Meet Glenn Bateman, sociologist, Free Zone committee member, and single existing member of the Free Zone think tank now that Nick Andros is dead. Meet ya, Lloyd mumbled. How's your arthritis, Glenn? Flagg asked. His tone was commiserating, and his eyes sparkled with high glee and secret knowledge. Glenn opened and closed his hands rapidly, smiling back at Flagg. No one would ever know what an effort it took to maintain that gentle smile, the intrinsic worth of the clay. Fine, he said. Much better for sleeping indoors, thank you. Flagg's smile faltered a bit. Glenn caught just a glimpse of narrow surprise and anger. Of fear? I've decided to let you go, he said briskly. His smile sprang forth again, radiant and vulpine. Lloyd uttered a little gasp of surprise, and Flagg turned to him. Haven't I, Lloyd? Sure. Lloyd said, sure enough. Well, fine, Glenn said easily. He could feel the arthritis sinking deeper and deeper into his joints, numbing them like ice, swelling them like fire. You'll be given a small motorbike, and you may drive back to at your leisure. Of course, I couldn't go without my friends. Oh, of course not. And all you have to do is ask. Get down on your knees and ask me. Glenn laughed heartily. He threw back his head and laughed long and hard, and as he laughed, the pain of his joints began to abate. He felt better, stronger, and in control again. Oh, you're a card, he said. I'll tell you what you do. Why don't you find a nice big sand pile, get yourself a hammer, and pound all that sand right up your ass? Flagg's face grew dark. The smile slipped away. His eyes, previously as dark as the jet stone Lloyd wore, now seemed to gleam yellowly. Whoa! His eyes, previously as dark as the jet stone Lloyd wore, now seemed... his eyes were gleaming yellowly. He reached out his hand to the locking mechanism of the door and wrapped his finger around it. There was an electric buzzing sound. Fire leaped out between his fingers, and there was a hot smell in the air. The lockbox fell to the floor, smoking and black. Lloyd Henrid cried out. The dark man grabbed the bars and threw the cell door back on its track. Stop laughing. Glenn laughed harder. Stop laughing at me. You're nothing, Glenn said, wiping his streaming eyes and still chuckling. Oh, pardon me. It's just that we were all so frightened. We made such a business out of you. I'm laughing as much at our own foolishness as at your regrettable lack of substance. Shoot him, Lloyd. Flagg had turned to the other man. His face was working horribly. His hands were hooked into Predator's claws. Oh, kill him yourself if you're gonna kill me. Kill me yourself if you're gonna kill me, Glenn said. Surely you're capable. Touch me with your finger and stop my heart. Make the sign of the inverted cross and give me a massive brain embolism. Bring down the lightning from the overhead socket to cleave me in two. Oh, oh dear. Oh dear me. Glenn collapsed onto the cell cot, rocked back and forth, consumed with the delirious laughter. Shoot him! The dark man roared at Lloyd. Pale, shaking with fear, Lloyd fumbled the pistol out of his belt, almost dropped it, then tried to point it at Glenn. He had to use both hands. Glenn looked at Lloyd, still smiling. He might have been at a faculty cocktail party back in the Brain Ghetto at Woods in New Hampshire, recovering from a good joke, now ready to turn the conversation back into some serious channels of reflection. If you have to shoot somebody, Mr. Henrid, shoot him. Do it now, Lloyd. Lloyd blindly pulled the trigger. The gun went off with a tremendous crash in the enclosed space. The echoes bounced furiously back and forth, but the bullet only clipped the concrete 2 inches from Glenn's right shoulder. Ricocheted, struck something else, and whined off again. Can't you do anything right? Flagg roared. Shoot him, you moron! Shoot him! He's standing right in front of you! I'm trying. Glenn's smile had not changed, and he had only flinched a little at the gunshot. I repeat, if you must shoot somebody, shoot him. He's really not human at all, you know. I once described him to a friend as the last magician of rational thought, Mr. Henrid. That was more correct than I knew. But he's losing his magic now. It's slipping away from him, and he knows it, and you know it too. Shoot him now, and save us all God knows how much bloodshed and dying. Flagg's face had grown very still. Shoot one of us anyhow, Lloyd, he said. I got you out of jail when you were dying of starvation. It's guys like this that you wanted to get back at, little guys who talk big. Lloyd said, Mister, you don't fool me. It's like Randy Flagg says. But he lies. You know he lies. He told me more of the truth than anyone else bothered him to in my whole lousy life, Lloyd said, and shot Glenn 3 times. Glenn was driven backward, twisted, and turned into a rag doll. Blood flew in the dim air. He struck the cot, bounced, and rolled onto the floor. He managed to get up on one elbow. It's all right, Mr. Henry, he whispered. You don't know any better. Shut up, you mouthy old bastard, Lloyd screamed. He fired again, and Glenn Bateman's face disappeared. He fired again, and the body jumped lifelessly. Lloyd shot him yet again. He was crying. The tears rolled down his angry, sunburned cheeks. He was remembering the rabbit he had forgotten and left to eat its own paws. He was remembering Poke, the people in the White Connie, and Gorgeous George. He was remembering the Phoenix jail and the rat, and how he hadn't been able to eat the ticking out of his mattress. He was remembering Trask and how Trask's leg had started to look like a Kentucky Fried Chicken dinner after a while. He pulled the trigger again, but the pistol only uttered a sterile click. All right, Flagg said softly. All right. Well done, Lloyd. Lloyd dropped the gun on the floor and shrank away from Flagg. Don't you touch me, he cried. I didn't do it for you. Yes, you did, Flagg said tenderly. You may not think so, but you did. He reached out and fingered the jet stone around Lloyd's neck. He closed his hand over it, and when he opened his hand again, the stone was gone. It had been replaced by a very small silver key. I promised you this, I think, the dark man said. In another jail. He was wrong. I keep my promises, don't I, Lloyd? Yes. The others are leaving, or planning to leave. I know who they are. I know all the names. Whitney, Ken, Jenny. Oh, yes. I know all the names.
Phoebe, stop looking.
Then why don't you
Phoebe?
put a stop to it?
Phoebe, enough.
Put a stop to it? I don't know. Maybe it's better to let them go. But you, Lloyd, you're my good and faithful servant, aren't you? Yeah, Lloyd whispered. The final admission. Yes, I guess I am. Without me, the best you could have done, was small shit, even if you had survived that jail, correct? Yeah. The Lauder boy knew that. He knew that I could make him bigger, taller. That's why he was coming to me. But he was too full of thoughts, too full of... looked suddenly perplexed and old. Then he waved his hand impatiently, and the smile bloomed on his face again. Perhaps it is going bad, Lloyd. Perhaps it is. For some reason not even I can understand. But the old magician has a few tricks left in him yet, Lloyd. One or two. Now listen to me. Time is short if we want to stop this. This crisis is in confidence. If we want to nip it in the bud, as it were, we want to finish things tomorrow with Underwood and Brentner. Now listen to me very carefully. Are we on 73? Oh, we are on 73. Okay. I kept wondering if we were on 73. Go figure, right? Lloyd didn't get to bed until past midnight and got no sleep until the small hours of the morning. Yes, we're going to go past our normal time because I've spent a lot of time talking today. He talked to the Rat Man. He talked to Paul Burleson, to Barry Dorgan, who agreed that what the Dark Man wanted could and probably should be done before daylight. Construction began on the front lawn of the MGM Grand around 10 p.m. on the 29th. A work party of 10 men with welding arcs and hammers and bolts, and a good supply of long steel pipes. They were assembling the pipes on 2 flatbed trucks in front of the fountain. The welding arcs soon drew a crowd. Look, Angie, Mom, Denny cried. It's a fireworks show. Yes, but it's time for all good little boys to be in bed. Angie Hirschfield drew the boy away with a secret fear in her heart, feeling that something bad, something perhaps as evil as the superflu itself, was in the making. Want to see the sparks? Denny wailed, but she drew him quickly and firmly away. Julie Lowry reached the Rat Man, the only fellow in Vegas she considered too creepy to sleep with, except maybe in a pinch. His black skin glimmered in the blue-white glare of the welding arcs. He was tricked out like an Ethiopian pirate. Wide silk trousers, a red sash, and a necklace of silver dollars around his scrawny neck. What is it, Ratty? He asked. The Rat Man don't know, dear, but the Rat Man got himself an idea. Yes, indeedy, he does. It looks like black work tomorrow, very black. Like to slip away for a quick one with Ratty, my dear. Maybe, Julie said, but only if you know what all this is about. Tomorrow all of Vegas is going to know, Ratty said. You bet your sweet and delectable little sugar buns on that. Come along with the Rat Man, dear, and he show you the 9,000 names of God. But Julie, much to the Rat Man's displeasure, had slipped away. By the time Lloyd finally went to sleep, the work was done and the crowd had drifted away. 2 large cages stood on the back of the 2 flatbeds. There were squarish holes in the right and left sides of each. Parked close by were 4 cars, each with a trailer hitch. Attached to each hitch was a heavy steel towing chain. The chains snaked across the lawn of the Grand, and each ended just inside the squarish holes of the cages. Okay, hold on. So there were 2 cages. They were on the back of flatbeds. So you got 2 cages and flatbeds. There are 2 holes in the left and top right of each. And there are chains attached to those squares and attached to trailers, to the hitches of the towing cars. Okay, so 4 cars. That makes sense. So each car has 1 chain. Okay. At the end of each chain, there dangled a single steel handcuff. So they plan on handcuffing, by the way it sounds. At dawn on the morning of September 30th, Larry heard the door at the far end of the cell block slide back. Footsteps came rapidly down the corridor. Larry was lying on his cot, hands laced at the back of his head. He had not slept the night before. He had been thinking, praying. It was all the same thing. Whichever it had been, the old wound in himself had finally closed, leaving him at peace. He had felt the two people that he had been all his life, the real one and the ideal one, merge into one living being. His mother would have liked this Larry, and Rita Blakemore. It was a Larry to whom Wayne Stuckey never would have had to tell the facts. It was a Larry that even that long ago oral hygienist might have liked. But would have liked. I'm going to die, if there's a God, and now I believe there must be. That's his will. We're going to die, and somehow all of this will end as the result of our dying. He suspected that Glenn Bateman had already died. There had been shooting in one of the other wings the day before, a lot of shooting. It was in the direction that Glenn had been taken rather than Ralph. Well, he had been old. His arthritis had been paining him, and whatever Flagg had planned for him that this morning was apt to be very unpleasant. The footsteps reached his cell. "Get up, Wonderbread," a gleeful voice called in. "The rat man has come for you, yo pale gray ass." Larry looked around. A grinning black pirate with a chain of silver dollars around his neck stood at the cell door, a drawn sword in one hand. Behind him stood the bespectacled CPA type, Burleson, his name was. "What is it?" Larry asked. "Dear man," the pirate said, "it is the end, the very end." "All right," Larry said, and got up. Burleson spoke quickly, and Larry saw that he was scared. "I want you to know that this is not my idea." "Nothing around here is, as far as I can see," Larry said. "Who was killed yesterday?" "Bateman," Burleson said, dropping his eyes. "Trying to escape." "Trying to escape," Larry muttered. He began to laugh. Ramba and joined him, mocked him. They laughed together. The cell door opened. Burleson stepped forward with the cuffs. Larry offered no resistance, only put out his wrists. Burleson attached the bracelets. "Trying to escape," Larry said. "One of these days you'll be shot trying to escape, Burleson." His eyes flicked toward the pirate. "You too, Ratty. Just shot trying to escape." He began to laugh again, and this time Ratman didn't join him. He looked at Larry sullenly and then began to raise his sword. "Put that down, you ass," Burleson said. They made a line of three going out, Burleson, Larry, and the Ratman, bringing up the rear. When they stepped through the door at the end of the wing, they were joined by another 5 men. One of them was Ralph, also cuffed. "Hey, Larry," Ralph said sorrowfully. "Did you hear? Did they tell you?" "Yes, I heard." "Bastards, it's almost over for them, isn't it?" "Yes, it is." "You shut up that talk," one of them growled. "It's you it's almost over for. You wait and see what he's got waiting for you. It's going to be quite a party." "Now it's over," Ralph insisted. "Don't you know it? Can't you feel it?" Ratty pushed Ralph, making him stumble. "Shut up," he cried. "Ratman don't want to hear no more of that honky bullshit voodoo no more." "You awful pale, Ratty." "You're awful pale, Ratty," Larry said, grinning. "Awful pale. You're the one who looks like gray meat now." Ratman brandished his sword again, but there was no menace in it. He looked frightened. They all did. There was a feeling in the air, a sense that they had all entered the shadow of some great and onrushing thing. An olive drab van, with Las Vegas County Jail on the side, stood in the sunny courtyard. Larry and Ralph were pushed in. The door slammed, the engine started, and they drew away. They sat down on the hard wooden benches, cuffed his hands between their knees. Ralph said in a low voice, "I heard one of them saying everybody in Vegas is going to be there. You think they're going to crucify us, Larry?" That or something like it. He looked at the big man. Ralph's sweat-stained hat was crammed down on his head. The feather was frayed and matted, but it still stuck up defiantly from the band. You scared, Ralph? Scared bad, Ralph whispered. Me, I'm a baby about pain. I never even liked going to the doctor's first shot. I'd find an excuse to put it off if I could. What about you? Plenty. Can you come over here and sit beside me? Ralph got up. I don't like dog hair on my book. Ralph got up, handcuffed, chains clinking, and sat beside Larry. They sat quietly for a few moments, and then Ralph said softly, We've hoed us one hell of a long row. That's true. I just wish I knew what it was all for. All I can see is that he's going to make a show of us. So everyone will see he's the big cheese. Is that what we came all the way for? I don't know. The van hummed on in silence. They sat on the bench without speaking, holding hands. Larry was scared, but beyond the scared feeling, the deeper sense of peace held, undisturbed. It was going to work out. It was going to work out. I will fear no evil, he muttered, but he was afraid. He closed his eyes, thought of Lucy. He thought of his mother, random thoughts, getting up for school on cold mornings, the time he had thrown up in church, finding a skin magazine in the gutter and looking at it with Rudy, both of them about 9 years old, watching the World Series, his first fall in L.A. with Yvonne Wetterlin. He didn't want to die. He was afraid to die. But he had his peace. He had his peace with it as best he could. He made his peace with it. The choice, after all, had never been his to make. And he had come to believe that death was just a staging area, a place to wait. The way you waited in a green room before going on to play. He rested as easily as he could, trying to make himself ready. The van stopped and the doors were thrown open. Let me see something, because if this is where it's going, I think it's going. I think we're going to pause. I think we're going to pause here in a minute, because I don't want to get halfway into what's going to happen and have to stop. So where the heck am I? The choice, after all, had never been his to make, and he had to come to believe that death was just a staging area, a place to wait, the way you waited in a green room before going on to play. He rested as easily as he could, trying to make himself ready. The van stopped and the doors were thrown open. Bright sunlight poured in, making him and Ralph blink dazedly. Ratman and Burleson hopped inside. Pouring in with the sunlight was a sound, a low, rustling murmur that made Ralph cock his head wearily. But Larry knew what that sound was. In 1986, the Tattered Remnants had played their biggest gig, opening for Van Halen at Chavez Raven. And the sound just before they went on had been like this sound. And so, when he stepped out of the van, he knew what to expect, and his face didn't change, although he heard Ralph's thin gasp beside him. They were on the lawn of a huge hotel casino. The entrance was flanked by two golden pyramids. Drawn up on the grass were two flatbed trucks. On each flatbed was a cage constructed of steel piping. Surrounding them were people. They spread out across the lawn in a rough circle. They were standing in the casino parking lot, on the steps leading up to the lobby doors, in the turnaround driveway, where incoming guests had once parked while the doorman whistled up a bellhop. They slipped out into the street itself. Some of the younger men had hoisted their girlfriends on their shoulders for a better look, at the upcoming festivities. The low murmuring was the sound of the crowd animal. Larry ran his eyes over them, and every eye he met turned away. His face seemed pallid, distant, marked for death, and seemed to know it. Yet they were here. He and Ralph were nudged toward the cages, and as they went, Larry noticed the cars with their chains and trailer hitches. But it was Ralph who understood the implication. He had, after all, spent most of his life working with and around machinery. Larry, he said in a dry voice, they're going to pull us to pieces. Go on, get in, the rat man said, breathing a stale odor of garlic into his face. Go on, get on up there, Wonder Bread. You and your friend go on, ride the tiger. Larry climbed onto the flatbed. Give me your shirt, Wonder Bread. Larry took off his shirt and stood bare-chested, the morning air cool and kind on his skin. Ralph had already taken off his. A ripple of conversation went through the crowd and died. They were both terribly thin from their walk. Each rib was clearly visible. Get in that cage, gray meat. Larry backed into the cage. Now it was Barry Dorgan giving the orders. He went from place to place, checking arrangements, a set expression of disgust on his face. The 4 drivers got into the cars and started them up. Ralph stood blankly for a moment, then seized one of the welded handcuffs that dangled into his cage and threw it out the small hole. It hit Paul Burleson on the head, and a nervous titter ran through the crowd. Dorgan said, You don't want to do that, fella. I'll just have to send some guys to hold you. Let 'em do their thing, Larry said to Ralph. He looked down at Dorgan. Hey, Barry, did they teach you this one at the Santa Monica PD? Another laugh rippled through the crowd. Police brutality, some daring soul cried. Dorgan flushed, but said nothing. He fed the chains further into Larry's cell, and Larry spit on them, a little surprised that he had enough saliva to do it. A small cheer went up from the back of the crowd, and Larry thought, maybe this is it. Maybe they're going to rise up. But his heart didn't believe it. Their faces were too pale. They're too secretive. The defiance from the back was meaningless. It was the sound of kids cutting up in a study hall. No more than that. There was doubt here, he could feel it, and disaffection. But Flagg colored even that. These people would steal away in a dead of night for some of the great empty space that the world had become, and the walking dude would let them go, knowing he only had to keep a hardcore people like Dorgan and Burleson. The runners and midnight creepers could be gathered up later, perchance to pay the price for their imperfect faith. There would be no open rebellion here. Dorgan, Ratman, and a third man crowded their way into the cage with him. Ratman was holding the cuffs welded to the chains open for Larry's wrists. Put out your arms, Dorgan said. Isn't law and order a wonderful thing, Barry? Put them out, goddammit. You don't look well, Dorgan. How's your heart these days? I'm telling you for the last time, my friend, put your arms out through those holes. Larry did it. The cuffs were slipped on and locked. Dorgan and the others backed out, and the door was shut. Larry looked right and saw Ralph standing in his cage, head down, arms at his sides. His wrists had been cuffed. You people know this is wrong, Larry cried, and his voice, trained by years of singing, rolled out of his chest with surprising strength. I don't expect you to stop it, but I do expect you to remember it. We're being put to death because Randall Flagg is afraid of us. He's afraid of us and the people we came from. A rising murmur ran through the crowd. Remember the way we die, and remember the next time it may be your turn to die this way, with no dignity, just an animal in a cage. That low murmur again, rising and angry in their silence. "Larry!" Ralph called out. Flagg was coming down the steps of the Grand, Lloyd Henrid beside him. Flagg was wearing jeans, a checked shirt, his jeans jacket with the 2 buttons on the breast pockets, and his run-down cowboy boots. In the sudden rush, the sound of those boot heels clocked their way down the cement path. Those boot heels clocking their way down the cement path was the only sound. A sound out of time. The dark man was grinning. Larry stared down at him. Flagg came to a halt between the 2 cages and stood looking up. His grin was darkly charming. He was a man completely in control, and Larry suddenly knew this was his watershed moment. The apotheosis of his life. Flagg turned away from them and faced his people. He passed his eyes over them, and no eye would meet his. "Lloyd," he said quietly, and Lloyd, who looked pale, haunted, and sickly, handed Flagg a paper that had been rolled up like a scroll. The dark man unrolled it, held it up, and began to speak. His voice was deep, sonorous, and pleasing, spreading in the stillness like a single silver ripple of a black pond. "Know you that this is a true bill to which I, Randall Flagg, have put my name on this 30th day of September the year 1990, now known as the year 1, year of the plague." "Flagg's not your name," Ralph roared. There was a shocked murmur from the crowd. "Why don't you tell him your real name?" Flagg took no notice. "Know you that these men, Lawson Underwood and Ralph Bretner, are spies here in Las Vegas with no good intent, but rather with seditious motives, who have entered this state with stealth and under cover of darkness?" "That's pretty good," Larry said, "since we were coming down Route 70 in broad daylight." He raised his voice to a shout. "They took us at noon on the interstate. How's that for stealth and under cover of darkness?" Flagg bore through this patiently, as if he felt that Larry and Ralph had every right to answer the charges. Not that it was going to make any ultimate difference. Now he continued, "Know that you, the cohorts of these men, were responsible for the sabotage bombing of the helicopters at Indian Springs, and therefore responsible for the deaths of Carl Hugh, Bill Jamison, and Cliff Benson. They are guilty of murder." Larry's eyes touched those of a man standing on the front rim of the crowd. Although Larry did not know it, this was Stan Bailey, operations chief at Indian Springs. He saw a haze of bewilderment and surprise cover the man's face, and saw him mouthing something ridiculous that looked like "Can Man." Know you that the cohorts of these men have sent other spies among us, and they have been killed. It is the sentence, then, that these men shall be put to death in an appropriate manner, to wit, that they shall be pulled apart. It is the duty and the responsibility of each of you to witness this punishment, so you may remember it and tell others what you have seen here today. Flagg's grin flashed out, meant to be solicitous in this instance, but still no more warmth than human than a shark's grin. "Those of you with children are excused." He turned toward the cars, which were now idling, sending out small puffs of exhaust into morning, and as he did so, there was a commotion near the front of the crowd. Suddenly, a man pushed through into the clearing. He was a big man, his face nearly as pallid as his cook's whites. The dark man had handed the scroll back to Lloyd, and Lloyd's hands jerked convulsively when Whitney Hogan pushed into the clear. There was a clear, ripping sound as the scroll tore in half. "Hey, you people!" Whitney cried. A confused murmur ran through the crowd. Whitney was shaking all over, as if with a palsy. His head kept jerking toward the dark man and then away again. Flagg regarded Whitney as with a ferocious smile. Dorgan started toward the cook and Flagg motioned him back. "This ain't right," Whitney yelled. "You know it ain't." Dead silence from the crowd. They might all have been turned to gravestones. Whitney's throat worked convulsively. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down like a monkey on a stick. "We was Americans once," Whitney cried out at last. "This ain't how Americans act. I wasn't so much, I tell you that, nothing but a cook, but I know this ain't how Americans act. Listening to some murdering freak in cowboy boots." A horrified, rustling gasp came from these new Las Vegans. Larry and Ralph exchanged a puzzled glance. "That's what he is," Whitney insisted. The sweat was running down his face like tears from the brushy edges of his flat top haircut. "You want to watch these two guys ripped into pieces right in front of you, huh? You think that's the way to start a new life? You think a thing like that can ever be right? I tell you, you'll have nightmares after it for the rest of your lives." The crowd murmured its assent. "We got to stop this," Whitney said. "You know it. We have to have we got to have time to think about what Whitney." That voice, smooth as silk, little more than a whisper, but enough to silence the cook's faltering voice completely. He turned toward Flagg, lips moving soundlessly, his eye as fixed as a mackerel's. Now the sweat was pouring down his face in torrents. "Whitney, you should have kept still." His voice was soft, but still it carried easily to every ear. "I would have let you go." "Why would I want you?" Whitney's lips moved, but no sound came out. "I'm here, Whitney." "No," Whitney whispered, and no one heard his demurral except Lloyd and Ralph and Larry, and possibly Barry Dorgan. Whitney's feet moved as if they had not heard his mouth. He sprung, and mushy black loafers whispered through the grass, and he moved toward the dark man like a ghost. The crowd had become slack-jawed and staring eye. Became a slack-jawed and staring eye. "I knew about your plans," the dark man said. "I knew what you meant to do before you did. But I would have let you crawl away until I was ready to take you back. Maybe in a year, maybe in 10. But that's all behind you now, Whitney. Believe it." Whitney found his voice one last time, his words rushing out in a strangled scream. "You ain't a man at all. You're some kind of a devil." Flagg stretched out the index finger of his left hand so that it almost touched Whitney Horgan's chin. "Yes, that's right," he said so softly that no one but Lloyd Larry Underwood heard him. "I am." A blue ball of fire, no bigger than a ping-pong ball. The ping-pong ball, Leo, was endlessly bouncing, leaped from the tip of Flagg's finger with a faint ozone crackle. An autumn wind of sighs went through those watching. Whitney screamed, but didn't move. The ball of fire lit on his chin. Then there was a sudden, cloying smell of burning flesh. The ball moved across his mouth, fusing his lips shut, blocking the scream behind Whitney's bulging eyes. It crossed one cheek, digging a charred and instantly cauterized trench. It closed his eyes. It paused above his forehead, and Larry heard Ralph speaking, saying the same thing over and over. And Larry joined his voice to Ralph's, making it a litany. "I will fear no evil. I will fear no evil. I will fear no evil." Yeah, did you hear what I said all over? Yeah. The ball of fire rolled up from Whitney's forehead, and now there was a hot smell of burning hair. It rolled toward the back of his head, leaving a grotesque bald strip behind it. Whitney swayed on his feet for a moment and then fell over mercifully, face down. The crowd released a long, sibilant sound. Ah! It was the sound people had made on the 4th of July when the fireworks display had been particularly good. Ah! The ball of blue fire hung in the air, bigger now, too bright to look at without slitting the eyes. The dark man pointed at it, and it moved slowly toward the crowd. Those in the front row, away faced Jenny Engstrom was among them, shrank back. In a thundering voice, Flagg challenged them. Is there anyone else here who disagrees with my sentence? If so, let him speak now. Deep silence greeted this. Flagg seemed satisfied. Then heads began to turn away from him suddenly. A surprised murmur ran through the crowd, then rose to a babble. Flagg seemed completely caught by surprise. Now people in the crowd began to cry out, and while it was impossible to make out the words clearly, the tone was one of wonder and surprise. The ball of fire dipped and spun uncertainly. The humming sound of an electric motor came to Larry's ears, and again he caught that puzzling name tossed from mouth to mouth, never clear, never all of one piece. Man, can, man, trash, trashy. Someone was coming through the crowd as if in answer to the dark man's challenge. And I know we could finish this, but I don't want to get into that yet. So we are going to stop here. Okay. Again, I do apologize for all the interruptions. But tonight we will start there and we will see what the trash can man has to do. So we got pretty far, but yeah, chapter 73 is really, really big. So we probably wouldn't have even got all the way through it. But yeah, we're going to see about finishing that up and then getting into 74. Okay. So I'm going to let you guys go. I have to run to the store. My vacuum died and I have to go get a new vacuum.
Don't forget
Fun,
charger.
huh? So yes, and your charger and your boots. Anyway, so I have to do some shopping. I'm going to let you guys go. That is my phone buzzing. Somebody's calling me.
Well, maybe it's time.
So I will talk to you guys later. Love y'all. Follow if you want. And y'all have a good day. Bye. Hold on, sweetie.